June 23, 1944. The mid-Atlantic Ocean, roughly 870 nautical miles west of the Cape Verde Islands. Commander Yuno Kamiyo stood inside the tight, dimly lit control room of the Japanese cargo submarine I-52, a steel leviathan carrying 2 tons of gold, 120 tons of tin, and other critical war materials, destined for Nazi-occupied France. Through his periscope, Kamiyo watched the German U-530 vanish into the darkness after completing a successful transfer. Radar components and 2 German technicians now safely aboard. The rendezvous had gone flawlessly. Soon I-52 would surface to begin its night run toward Europe, slicing through the Black Ocean at 15 knots beneath a moonless sky. Everything seemed perfect. Yet, within 3 hours, Commander Kamiyo and his 94-man crew would be dead. Victims of a weapons system they didn't even know existed. Their destruction, the sounds of metal rupturing and compartments imploding, would be captured on wire recorders by American aircraft circling high above. Their sensors tethered to the sea by floating devices called sonobuoys. Dropped from Avenger torpedo bombers, these buoys would detect the dying echoes of I-52 and transmit them back to operators miles away. This wasn't just the end of one submarine. It marked the collapse of Japan's confidence in its naval invisibility. The ocean, once the empire's secure highway to conquest, had become an American surveillance grid where nothing could hide. The mathematics of this technological imbalance were already rewriting the war across the Pacific, in numbers shattered. Every illusion Japanese submariners held about their skill, strategy, and survival. Between 1941 and 1945, U.S. submarines sank 314 Japanese vessels, totaling 5.3 million tons, over half of Japan's total merchant losses. In contrast, Japan's own submarines destroyed just 184 Allied ships, amounting to 1 million tons. But the real disparity wasn't just in tonnage. It was philosophical. It revealed 2 fundamentally different approaches to undersea warfare: industrial output and innovation. While Japan built enormous submarines, capable of carrying aircraft and circumnavigating the globe, America built sonar arrays that could hear them coming from miles away. While Japanese engineers focused on crafting magnificent, complex vessels, American factories churned out sonobuoys, FM sonar systems, radar, and acoustic torpedoes faster than Japan could design countermeasures. This wasn't a single moment of revelation, but a slow awakening. 1,000 deadly encounters teaching Japanese crews that they were being hunted by an enemy they couldn't see, tracked by technologies they couldn't comprehend, and destroyed by an industrial power beyond imagination. Lieutenant Commander Naokio Nambu, captain of the gigantic I-401 submarine aircraft carrier, would later tell American interrogators that his moment of realization, the instant he knew Japan had lost, didn't come during battle. It came while eavesdropping on American radio traffic during a patrol. The casual tone, the endless resources, the sheer coordination of operations spanning thousands of miles. all pointed to a power Japan could never match. For many Japanese submariners, however, this realization didn't come intellectually. It came through terror. Through encounters with American anti-submarine warfare that left survivors dazed and broken. This is not a tale of epic battles or glorious last stands. It is the story of gradual revelation, of proud warriors awakening to the crushing reality of technological inferiority, long before their nation formally surrendered. When Japan entered World War II in December 1941, its submarine fleet was among the world's best. The Imperial Navy fielded around 70 ocean-going submarines, many of groundbreaking design. The I-400 class, for instance, the largest submarines ever built until the nuclear age, stretched 400 feet in length, displacing 5,900 tons underwater. Each carried 3 Seiron floatplane bombers in a sealed hangar, ready to be launched for attacks as distant as New York City or the Panama Canal. With enough fuel to sail 1.5 times around the globe, their engineering was nothing short of astonishing. They featured trim systems for underwater stability, demagnetization cables to resist mines, air search radar, and anechoic coatings to absorb sonar pulses. Even smaller submarines like the I-52 cargo type were formidable, capable of 21,000 nautical miles of travel, ferrying strategic materials between Japan and Germany. Fast attack models prowled the Pacific with long-range torpedoes and impressive underwater endurance. Else, Japanese crews were disciplined, well-trained, and deeply familiar with their machines. Commanders such as Tatsunosuke Ariazumi, who led late war operations, were masters of submarine tactics. Early in the war, these forces had reason to be confident. They aided in Pearl Harbor, conducted reconnaissance, and supported major fleet actions with precision. But Japan's doctrine, focusing on fleet support and attacks on enemy warships, proved disastrous. While Japanese submarines hunted aircraft carriers, American submarines were methodically strangling Japan's merchant fleet, the lifeline of its war economy. Worse, Japan's tactical approach meant its submarines met American anti-submarine technology under the most dangerous conditions. Where the U.S. Navy's defenses were strongest. The first encounters with sonobuoys came in 1944, when American industry had perfected the device. Deceptively simple, small, battery-powered sonar units dropped from aircraft. They floated on the surface, listening for submarine noises and transmitting them via radio to patrol planes above. Originally developed by the British under the codename High, the technology was quickly adopted and improved by the Americans. The result was revolutionary. Previously, an aircraft could only attack a submarine while it was visible or detected by radar on the surface. Once it dove, the sub was effectively invisible. Sonobuoys changed that forever. Aircraft could now scatter a pattern of 5-color, coded buoys: purple, orange, blue, red, and yellow, forming an underwater listening grid. By cycling through these frequencies, operators could detect propeller noise hull vibrations, and even the faint hum of internal machinery. By 1944 to 1945, sonobuoys became standard on every American anti-submarine aircraft. For Commander Yuno Kamio aboard I-52, the first hint of danger came at 11:40 p.m., June 23, 1944. An Avenger torpedo bomber, flown by Lieutenant Commander Jesse D. Taylor from the escort carrier USS Bogue, picked up the Japanese submarine on radar as it ran on the surface. Taylor dropped flares, lighting up the Black Sea, the silhouette of I-52 briefly revealed in ghostly light. Moments later, he attacked with depth bombs as the Japanese vessel dived. The explosions erupted close by, the ocean boiling. But I-52 survived the first salvo. What came next would redefine submarine warfare forever. Commander Jesse D. Taylor released a purple sonobuoy into the dark Atlantic. Within moments, his radio operator picked up the unmistakable rhythm of submarine propellers. The signal was clear and alive. Through this floating ear beneath the waves, Taylor could now track I-52 as she maneuvered desperately, predicting her evasive turns and positioning his aircraft for the final strike. He released a Mark 24 Fido mine, an acoustic homing torpedo that zeroed in on the submarine's propeller noise and pursued it relentlessly. Moments later, the sonobuoys captured everything. The detonation, the screech of tearing metal, and the horrifying sounds of the hull collapsing under pressure. Taylor's crew later described the noises as crackling and crunching, like a tin can being crushed. I-52 plunged 17,000 feet to the ocean floor, taking Commander Kamio, his 94 crewmen, 14 passengers, and 2 German technicians with her. The sonobuoy recordings survived, archived today in the U.S. National Archives on 2 thin reels labeled Gordon Wire No. 1 and No. 2, preserving the final moments of a submarine whose crew never understood the weapon that destroyed them. The loss of I-52 sent shockwaves through the Japanese Navy. When reports of the sinking filtered back through intelligence channels, they revealed something terrifying. American aircraft could now track submarines underwater. The implications were devastating. Every time a Japanese submarine dived to escape an aircraft, it wasn't escaping at all. It was simply vanishing from sight, not from detection. Beneath the surface, they remained perfectly visible to acoustic sensors. The U.S. Navy's hunter-killer groups, centered around escort carriers like USS Bogue, had fused radar, sonobuoys, and acoustic torpedoes into a single, integrated killing system. Submarine hunting had evolved from random encounters into a process of methodical annihilation. USS Bogue's task force alone sank 13 German and Japanese submarines between February 1943 and July 1945, employing these techniques again and again. Soon, Japanese submariners began reporting the impossible. Aircraft appeared over their dive positions with uncanny precision. Depth charges landed in perfect patterns, as if guided by unseen eyes. Torpedoes followed their evasive zigzags, as though steered by an invisible hand. They were being hunted by technologies their own navy did not possess, could not counter. and barely understood. The psychological strain deepened in June 1945 during Operation Barney, when 9 American submarines, armed with FM sonar, slipped into the Sea of Japan through minefields that Japanese planners had declared impenetrable. The Sea of Japan had long been considered a sanctuary, protected by 4 massive mine barriers across the Tsushima Strait. Japanese shipping moved confidently through those waters, convinced submarines could never breach them. But FM sonar, a revolutionary new system, changed everything. It emitted a distinctive chiming tone whenever it detected a mine, a sound American crews nicknamed Hell's Bells. This technology allowed submarines to map minefield patterns, chart safe paths, and navigate through defenses the Japanese believed were absolute. On June 4, 1945, the first 3 submarines, Sea Dog, Creevol, and Spadefish, entered Tsushima Strait submerged. Their sonar screens painted a ghostly image of the minefields ahead, while the eerie chimes of Hell's Bells echoed through the control rooms. Weaving between explosives spaced barely 50 yards apart, the boats crept forward for 20 tense hours before surfacing safely inside the Sea of Japan. 2 more groups soon followed, and within days, 9 American submarines were operating freely in waters Japan had once considered untouchable. The results were staggering. Between June 9 and June 24, 1945, those 9 submarines sank 28 Japanese vessels, totaling 54, 786 tons, including a destroyer and another submarine. They attacked freely, surfacing at night to recharge batteries and diving by day to strike shipping that believed itself secure. When reports reached Japanese Naval Command, disbelief gave way to dread. Survivors spoke of American submarines inside the Sea of Japan, attacking without restraint and escaping without difficulty. The psychological impact was enormous. If the enemy could penetrate Japan's most fortified waters, if they possessed technology that could navigate minefields years in the making, then nowhere was safe. The ocean itself had become enemy territory. Japanese submarine captains understood immediately. They were no longer hunters. They were prey. Each patrol became less about completing missions and more about simply surviving. And the technological gap extended far beyond sonar. American submarines carried radar systems capable of detecting surface targets over 20 miles away in clear conditions. By contrast, Japanese submarines didn't receive radar until mid-1944, and even then, only in limited numbers, and with performance far inferior to their American counterparts. This meant U.S. submarines could detect, track, and ambush Japanese vessels long before being spotted themselves. They could strike from beyond visual range, guided by information advantages that Japan could neither match nor mitigate. Worse still, American submarines were supported by ULTRA intelligence, the top secret, Allied code-breaking effort that decrypted Japanese naval communications. U.S. forces often knew Japanese submarine schedules, patrol zones, and supply routes before the submarines themselves did. Combined with radar and sonar dominance, This meant Japanese submarines were operating in an ocean where the enemy knew where they were headed, and how to find them. Lieutenant Commander Naokio Nambu, captain of the I-401, later confessed to American interrogators that he'd felt constantly watched, constantly tracked, never safe, even in the middle of an empty ocean. That wasn't paranoia. It was the truth. The scale of America's industrial power left Japanese submariners stunned after the war. While Japan struggled to keep 70 operational submarines, the United States built 314 between 1941 and 1945, replacing losses faster than combat could inflict them. Shipyards like Mare Island, Alice, California, Electric Boat, Connecticut, and Portsmouth, New Hampshire, ran around the clock, launching fleet submarines at a pace Japan couldn't hope to rival. The American Gato and Balao class submarines, though smaller than Japan's massive I boats, were masterpieces of industrial coordination. Constructed from standardized parts, produced by dozens of factories across the US, a single Gato class required roughly 140,000 individual components, built by contractors in 32 different states. Yet, the supply chain ran seamlessly. When a submarine needed repairs, spare parts were immediately available. When one was lost, a replacement was launched within months. Japan, meanwhile, faced crippling shortages, repair delays, and overburdened shipyards. Submarines damaged in battle often waited weeks, or even months, for parts that might never arrive. The same imbalance was evident in torpedo technology. At the war's outset, the U.S. Navy's Mark 14 torpedo was notoriously unreliable, plagued by depth, control flaws, faulty magnetic triggers, and defective detonators. For nearly 2 years, American crews fought with weapons that either ran too deep or failed to explode. It should have been Japan's chance to exploit a weakness. But the Americans did something remarkable. Their submariners fixed their own weapons, despite resistance from bureaucrats. At the Bureau of Ordnance front, line crews ran unauthorized tests, exposed the problems, and implemented solutions themselves. By September 1943, the Mark 14's defects were resolved. Soon after, the Mark 18 electric torpedo entered service, leaving no visible wake and offering no warning to its target. The tide beneath the sea had permanently shifted. The Mark 24 mine, in truth, an acoustic homing torpedo codenamed Fido, could be dropped from aircraft and would automatically home in on the sound of submarine propellers until it struck its target. Japan never developed anything like it. Japanese torpedoes were reliable, yes, but they offered no real technological edge. And far more damaging than that, Japan's industrial output couldn't come close to matching America's. While US submarines typically carried 24 torpedoes per patrol, firing them liberally, confident in a steady resupply. Japanese submarines carried fewer and were forced to conserve every shot. Ammunition shortages meant hesitation in moments when speed meant survival. Over time, the combined weight of these technological and industrial disparities became impossible to ignore. For Japan's submariners, it was a mathematical certainty. A grim equation written in tonnage and blood. Each patrol, each desperate engagement, each narrow escape hammered home the same truth. The ocean now belonged to America. By 1944, the peak of the submarine campaign, American boats were sinking an average of one Japanese ship every single day. In that year alone, 492 Japanese merchant vessels, totaling 2.38 million tons, were sent to the bottom. Japan simply couldn't build replacements fast enough. Its merchant fleet, which had stood at around 6 million tons in 1941, had withered to 2 million tons by August 1945, with barely 320,000 tons of it still capable of carrying cargo. This wasn't just a military disaster. It was economic strangulation. The arteries of Japan's empire were being severed one by one. Rice from Southeast Asia never reached Tokyo. Oil from the Dutch East Indies never saw Japanese refineries. Rubber, tin, tungsten, the very lifeblood of Japan's war industry, lay stranded in distant colonies while American submarines prowled the sea lanes like wolves. By 1945, the destruction was nearly total. American submarines sometimes struggled to find targets large enough to justify firing a torpedo. The once mighty Japanese merchant marine had been annihilated. The few surviving ships clung to the coastline, creeping through narrow channels or hiding in port, terrified to venture into open waters. After the war, above, Japanese cabinet ministers admitted to the Diet that the loss of shipping was the single greatest cause of Japan's defeat. They acknowledged that American submarines had done more to ensure Allied victory than any other weapon system of the war. For those Japanese submariners who lived long enough to witness American operations firsthand, after surrender, the truth was crushing. Captain Tatsunosuke Ariazumi, architect of the I-400 submarine project and one of Japan's most respected undersea commanders, took his own life aboard I-401 rather than endure the humiliation of surrender. He understood, better than most, what Japan had truly been fighting against, an industrial and technological power so vast it had rendered their courage meaningless. When I-401 and her sister ship, I-400, the massive submarine aircraft carriers, finally surrendered in August 1945, the Americans who boarded them were awestruck. These submarines were longer than destroyers, displacing more tonnage than anything in the U.S. submarine fleet. They were capable of launching aircraft, carrying enough fuel to circle the globe, and represented years of engineering brilliance. Yet, for all their grandeur, they had achieved nothing. Neither vessel had fired a shot in combat. Their planned attacks, one on Ulithi Atoll, another on the Panama Canal, never materialized. These colossal submarines, the pride of Japanese innovation, became monuments to futility. They had been built for missions that American technology had already made impossible. They couldn't approach their targets undetected. They couldn't survive in American-controlled waters. They couldn't outrun the hunter, killer groups, the radar, the sonobuoys, or the acoustic torpedoes that hunted them with machine like precision. When American engineers examined the captured submarines, they found both impressive craftsmanship and serious vulnerabilities. Their hulls were weaker than German or American designs, limiting their safe diving depth. Their large size made them loud, easily detectable on sonar. They lacked radar until the final months of the war, and even then, their sets were crude. They had no equivalent to America's FM sonar, which could detect mines and navigate safely through fields Japan considered impassable. Their anti-aircraft guns were outdated and ineffective against U.S. carrier aircraft. And, most critically, they lacked the integrated fire control computers that gave American submarines their deadly accuracy. While U.S. subs used automated targeting systems that instantly calculated a torpedo's range, speed, and trajectory, Japanese crews relied on manual calculations, slow, error-prone, and perilous during combat. The gap wasn't minor. It was foundational, affecting every level of undersea warfare, from detection and communication to attack and survival. And the human cost was staggering. Japan lost 130 submarines during the war, nearly twice the loss rate suffered by the Americans. Of the roughly 70 submarines Japan possessed in December 1941, plus those built afterward, almost all were destroyed by American anti-submarine tactics. The very technologies Japanese sailors had come to dread. Sonar, radar, aircraft, depth charges, and coordinated hunter-killer patrols. An estimated 10,000 Japanese submariners perished, a mortality rate exceeding 70%. At the start of the war, submarine duty had been regarded as prestigious, even noble. By its end, it was seen as a death sentence. Young recruits entering submarine school knew their odds. Families grieved before the men even sailed. Those who returned did so not as heroes, but as survivors of a doomed service. A shattered arm of a defeated navy, undone not by lack of bravery, but by a lack of machines that could match their enemies. The psychological transformation of these men mirrored that of German torpedoes, who later saw America's industrial might with their own eyes. But the Japanese submariners didn't need to see it. They had heard it, felt it, and died by it beneath the waves. Both Germany and Japan had challenged nations whose technological and industrial capabilities stretched far beyond their imagination. And both learned, through vastly different experiences, the same devastating truth: in modern war, courage cannot compensate for the power of industry. For the Japanese submariners, who surrendered in August 1945, the proof of American technological superiority was overwhelming and impossible to deny. They were escorted aboard U.S. submarines and shown innovations they had never imagined. They toured American naval bases and witnessed production facilities that finally explained why the U.S. Navy never seemed to run out of ships, torpedoes, or fuel. They saw the sonobuoys that had hunted their comrades across the Pacific. They studied the FM sonar that enabled American submarines to slip through minefields once thought impassable. They examined radar systems that granted U.S. crews vision far beyond the horizon and handled the acoustic torpedoes that had stalked and destroyed so many of their own vessels. Lieutenant Commander Nambu, commander of I-401, was one of those men. After surrendering, he was taken aboard USS Segundo and personally guided by Lieutenant Commander Stephen L. Johnson through a tour of the American submarine. Nambu inspected Segundo's radar, sonar, fire, control computers, and torpedo loading mechanisms, every system more advanced than anything aboard Japanese submarines. But what impressed him most was not just the technology's complexity, it was its reliability. Everything functioned exactly as intended. Equipment didn't fail. Systems performed flawlessly. The American crew operated their submarine with a calm assurance born of confidence. Confidence that came from knowing their machines were superior and their logistics unshakable. Johnson's crew had survived 9 combat patrols, sunk enemy vessels, evaded Japanese counterattacks, and fully expected to make it home alive. Their Japanese counterparts lived under no such illusion. They knew the enemy could find them, track them, and kill them, and that knowledge weighed heavily on every mission. Later, Nambu told American interrogators that the moment he realized Japan had truly lost the war wasn't when he heard of Hiroshima or Nagasaki, but months earlier, when he intercepted American radio transmissions. He heard how effortlessly the U.S. Navy coordinated massive operations across thousands of miles of ocean. The scale, precision, and technological sophistication revealed in ordinary communications made it clear Japan had no hope of matching such power. In the months that followed surrender, the evidence only grew. Japanese submariners were brought to American occupied bases from Sasebo, where their captured boats were examined, to Tokyo Bay, where the surrender ceremony took place with American submarines deliberately displayed in full view. During that ceremony, Vice Admiral Charles A. Lockwood, commander of the U.S. Pacific Submarine Force, ordered his flag raised aboard the captured I-400 and I-401, a symbolic gesture declaring them American. Submarines had conquered their Japanese counterparts through technological and industrial dominance. When the I-400 class submarines were later taken to Hawaii for detailed study, Japanese officers accompanied them as technical advisors. They watched as American engineers meticulously dismantled each vessel, photographing every part, taking precise measurements, and documenting every system. The Americans were methodical, professional, and occasionally impressed by aspects of Japanese design, but never intimidated. They understood that victory had not come through luck or seamanship, but through technology, multiplied by industrial capacity on a scale Japan could never match. The final humiliation came in 1946, when the I-400, I-401, and other captured submarines were deliberately sunk off the coast of Hawaii as target practice. Officially, the decision was made to prevent Soviet engineers from examining the submarines, but to the Japanese who learned of it, the symbolism was crushing. their greatest technological achievements, the pride of Japan's wartime engineering, were destroyed casually by a nation that no longer needed to study them. The United States had already surpassed every innovation those submarines represented. The mighty vessels that once symbolized Japan's naval ambition were now little more than target hulks, their destruction barely noted in American records. For Japanese submariners, the message was unmistakable. Japan had built remarkable machines, but America had built technology that made them irrelevant. The ocean had never truly been Japan's domain. It had only taken time for American power and innovation to prove it. When the surviving submariners returned home, they carried those lessons with them. Many wrote memoirs describing the shock of discovering America's technological depth. Others lectured to Japan's new self, defense forces, emphasizing the absolute necessity of maintaining technological parity in modern warfare. Submarine veterans associations, formed in the 1950s and 1960s, devoted themselves to understanding the causes of Japan's defeat. Their conclusions were unanimous: technological inferiority, industrial weakness, and strategic mismanagement had doomed Japan's submarine fleet from the very beginning. No level of courage, discipline, or sacrifice could overcome that imbalance. American submarines possessed advantages at every level: detection, fire control, communications, navigation, and logistics, while Japanese submarines fought from permanent disadvantage, no matter how well designed or commanded. Those lessons profoundly shaped post-war Japan. As the nation rebuilt, survivors of the submarine force entered industry and government, infusing Japan's recovery with a deep respect for technological precision and reliability. The post-war economic miracle of the 1950s and 1960s drew, in part, from those wartime lessons. Japanese engineers shifted focus from massive, symbolic projects like the I-400s to smaller, highly efficient, and dependable systems. Companies such as Sony, Toyota, and Honda embraced principles born from military defeat. True superiority required not just clever design, but complete, integrated systems, supported by quality control, consistent production, and continuous improvement. Former naval officers, including ex-submariners, played critical roles in shaping these companies, applying lessons learned the hard way. Technology wins wars and builds nations. By the 1960s and 1970s, the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force began incorporating American technology into its submarines. Japanese crews trained under U.S. instructors learned American tactics and operated sonar and radar systems co-developed with their former enemies. The nations that once fought beneath the waves had become allies, united by an understanding that industrial and technological mastery decides modern warfare. For the Japanese submariners who had endured the war, this transformation felt like vindication. They had once been hunted by American sonar, but now, Japan built submarines that could rival the very technology that once doomed them. By the 1980s, Japan's submarines ranked among the world's finest, silent, precise, and efficient. The ultimate realization of lessons learned in bitter defeat. And somewhere, in the National Archives, the wire recordings of I-52's final moments still exist, fragile spools capturing the sound of an underwater explosion that marked not just the end of a submarine, but the dawn of a new technological age in warfare. Modern analysis conducted by the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory confirmed what wartime and records only hinted at. Acoustic homing torpedoes, guided by signals relayed through sonobuoys, had decisively destroyed I-52. The technology that claimed Commander Kamo and his crew in June 1944 represented a level of capability Japan would never match during the war. Those same systems, sonar, radar, and acoustic-guided torpedoes, would soon become standard tools of modern navies around the world, refined and perfected in the decades that followed. The story of Japan's submariners coming to realize that the ocean was no longer theirs is, at its heart, a story of technological transformation in warfare. Superior science, backed by massive industrial power, outweighed courage, skill, and determination. The Japanese submariners were neither cowardly nor incompetent. They fought with bravery and discipline. But they were forced to battle with outdated equipment against an enemy that held decisive technological superiority. This gradual recognition of defeat mirrored that of German POWs in America, though their circumstances differed. Both groups encountered American technologies they could neither understand nor counter. Systems that redefined warfare itself. And both returned home carrying lessons that would help shape their nations post-war recovery, emphasizing the need to match American innovation, not merely admire or resent it. The oceans that Japan's submariners once patrolled with confidence had become American domains, dominated through science and industry. Sonobuoys floated across the surface, transmitting the faintest underwater sounds. Radar swept the horizon far beyond human sight. Acoustic torpedoes hunted their targets autonomously. And hunter-killer groups. Aircraft and ships working in seamless coordination. Tracked and destroyed submarines with relentless precision. By mid-1945, this transformation was complete. Japanese submarines had nowhere left to hide, no sanctuary, and no realistic hope of survival. When the 9 American submarines of Operation Barney emerged triumphantly from the Sea of Japan through the La Rouse Strait in June 1945, having sunk 28 Japanese ships in waters once deemed impregnable, the psychological collapse of Japan's armed naval forces was absolute. If American submarines could navigate minefields and operate freely in Japan's most fortified waters, then the empire's naval supremacy was finished. The seas now belonged to those who controlled the technology, not the territory. The surviving Japanese submariners understood this truth deeply. They had been hunted, tracked, and destroyed by systems they could neither detect nor defeat. Those who lived through it knew that Japan's defeat was inevitable the moment America's technological and industrial superiority came into full view. The ocean, they realized, had never truly belonged to Japan. It had only taken time for reality and science to reveal itself. American sonar buoys, radar networks, acoustic torpedoes, and industrial might had transformed undersea warfare completely. No matter how skilled or courageous Japan's submariners were, they were trapped in an environment where the enemy held decisive, invisible advantages. The realization came slowly. Through desperate encounters, narrow escapes, and grim reports from lost comrades. But by 1945, it was universal among survivors. The ocean was no longer theirs. Above. It belonged to the nation that mastered the technology to control it. America's victory beneath the waves was not born of seamanship alone, alone. It was achieved through science, engineering, and industry. The union of innovation and production on a scale the world had never seen. That legacy still endures in today's navies. Sonar remains the backbone of submarine operations. Acoustic torpedoes continue to serve as standard weapons, and modern sonobuoys, descendants of the 1944 models, now patrol oceans across the globe, dropped from aircraft and warships alike. The technological revolution that once shocked Japanese submariners continues to evolve. Today's submarines employ systems that would have astonished both American and Japanese crews of World War II. Yet, the essential lesson remains unchanged: technological superiority, sustained by industrial strength, determines victory. Japanese submariners learned this truth through defeat, and they carried it home. Their experiences helped shape Japan's post-war reconstruction, influencing national policy, engineering culture, and military doctrine for generations. The submarines that once symbolized Japan's naval might now rest as museum relics, or lie silently on the ocean floor, monuments to engineering brilliance overtaken by progress. But the men who operated them learned lessons that reshaped nations. Lessons about how technology decides not only the fate of battles, but the destiny of nations. The tale of those Japanese submariners, hearing the echo of American sonobuoys and realizing the sea no longer belonged to them, stands as a timeless reminder of technological evolution in warfare. From confidence to despair, from presumed dominance to humbled realization, their journey transformed individuals and nations alike. The ocean changed hands, not through massive surface engagements, but through invisible machines, floating on waves, listening beneath them, transmitting data that guided scientific precision in the art of war. Commander Yuno Kamiyo, along with thousands of Japanese submariners who perished in the Pacific, were defeated by an industrial and technological system they could not comprehend until it was too late. Those who survived carried that understanding into the future, shaping post-war Japan and influencing global naval strategy for decades to come. In the end, the ocean belonged not to those who fought hardest, but to those who mastered the technology to command it. A lesson learned painfully by Japan's submariners between 1941 and 1945. and one that remains just as relevant in the modern age of warfare and innovation.